Moving into disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof, Councillor Burke.
Yeah, I'll declare on item 6B because of issues with my employer.
Well, I guess we'll find out after you're gone whether there are actually any issues other than that. Next up, approval of minutes for the April 16th FSP meeting. Moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Veith. All those in favor? That's carried. So next up we have a presentation from Philippa Reynolds, long-term financial plan update, and in response, I believe, to a motion council passed at the last council meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Council, senior staff, and members of the public. Today we are here to present to you in a response to a motion that was passed by Council on April 23rd in regards to the long-term financial plan, which Council received on April 16th. So this was the actual motion that Council passed, and I will summarize briefly. First, the history of the current infrastructure funding generated through the 20% of appropriation of assessment growth, so reporting back on that. What the forecast is for future assessment that we have included in the long-term financial plan. The budget and actuals for the Waterloo North Hydro dividends for the past 3 years, so 16, 17, and 18. And finally, the 10-year impact of repurposing some of the Capital Reserve Fund funding. While infrastructure renewal is something that all cities and governments are grappling with, this council has been intentional in being part of the solution by taking steps towards finding an answer. Previous Waterloo City Councilors have also, and councils, have taken measures to set aside funds to renew assets by creating the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund in 2009 and dedicating funding from assessment growth in order to grow that reserve. I'll cover more about this shortly in my presentation since it was one of the questions in the motion passed by Council. First, I'm going to start off with the dividends. So the budget for 2016, 17, and 18 for dividends is $1.7 million, and for interest is $1.3 million. So I think one of the questions was confirmation that the $1.7 million does not include any interest, and that is correct. So the total budget is $3 million. The actuals for the same time period have come in as follows: $4 million in 2016, $4.5 million in 2017, and forecasted to be $4.2 million in 2018. The dividends have been declared and we have received those. However, the interest has been prorated based on what has been received in the first quarter. We receive them on a cash flow basis. And so that $1.2 million surplus for 2018 is currently a forecast. Reserve reallocations. In January, Council saw the value of consolidating several smaller reserves, if you recall, into a few larger reserves in order to create more flexibility and to support the strategy towards more of a focus on rehabilitation. This is where, if you recall, there was the creation of the new General Operating Reserve Fund. And so there was a consolidation of smaller reserves in order to create this larger reserve for general operating contingencies. There was also the consolidation of CRF, and this was taking 75% of the Uptown Development Reserve and consolidating it with the current CRF reserve. The purpose of the reserve was also changed. Previously, up until this point in time, CRF has been used to fund infrastructure in addition to growth projects and new projects, so growth being our statutory requirement on the development charges type projects, as well as any new type of initiatives. So it was used for all of those purposes. But since the consolidation, it has been focused on new and growth. So this would be studies, our statutory requirement on DCs, and anything new. So the infrastructure funding has moved over entirely into CURF. Previously, CURF, if you recall, was only for roads and facilities, but we have many more asset classes than that. And so CURF has been broadened to be infrastructure funding for all of those assets. So one of the questions posed in the motion was the funds repurposed from CRF to operating. This is what Council approved on April 16th. There was a minor change to the second last bullet there, the Local Planning Appeals Tribunal, which is now the new name. And so we have adjusted the slide, but otherwise this is exactly what Council has approved. And to put this into context, the value of the long-term financial plan model is that it considers both operating and capital assumptions at the same time over a long period of time. And so what it does is provide us some clarity when you're making changes in one area and what that does to the broader picture. And so when we did all of this consolidation and the actual model itself, we saw an opportunity to make some limited but strategic contributions to 4 reserves and 1 operating line. We know that economic development and winter control are key areas of interest for Council. And so there was a refocus of the majority of the $760,000, with $590,000 of it going to those 3 particular lines. So the Economic Development Reserve, the General Operating, the Winter Control Reserve, as well as the actual operating budget as well, to make those items more sustainable. So, CRF has been refocused and essentially shrunk to deal more with growth and new. The result of this 700, and I apologize, it says 720, but it should say $760,000 on the screen that you just saw on the previous screen. The result of that $760,000 reallocation from CRF to the other reserves and the winter control operating budget is an impact over 10 years of $8 million. At the same time, please note that the operating budget contributes to CRF annually. And so really, our capital program from a CRF perspective is funded through taxes. The contribution from operating to CRF in 2018 is $7.3 million. While we did the consolidation that I just spoke of earlier with the piggy banks, $200,000 of annual funding is also now coming into CRF as a result of the reallocation from the Uptown Development Reserve as well as the Computer Reserve. This doesn't take into account any kind of surplus that may be coming from the Waterloo North Hydro dividends that we spoke of earlier, but if there was a surplus, 75% of it would be coming into CRF. In regards to assessment growth and the forecast that was used, for the first 8 years from 2019 to 2026, $1.1 million of assessment growth was assumed in the long-term financial plan model. And for the balance of the time period in the model, which is 2027 to 2042, it takes that $1.1 million and approximately adds about $50,000 a year. Some years it's 30, some years it's 40, some years it's 50, but it's in that range. The reason for that is because the model did incorporate the development charges population growth within the model in order to correlate assessment growth with population. However, in those first several years, the population growth was not identifying an assessment growth of 1.1, it was identifying a lower number, which staff felt was very, very conservative in light of what has been received for quite a few years in a row. And so we built in the 1.1, still feeling that's reasonable and conservative, but have the model adjusted for all future years to incorporate that growth. And that will be adjusted each time we do the development charges bylaw, which will be every 4 years. So the population growth and what that means from an assessment perspective will be adjusted as time goes on. Now, the history of infrastructure funding, as I spoke of, a previous council did add a new reserve, which was for the purpose of infrastructure renewal, called the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve, CIRF. And as a result of identifying 20% of assessment growth each and every year from that reserve, there has been an accumulation of $7.9 million for infrastructure funding. What is changing with regard to the long-term financial plan that Council, these particular measures that Council approved, is that using a $1.1 million assessment for future, this reserve would receive $220,000 at 20%. And if you recall, that was increased to 30%, and so that would be $330,000. What may not be apparent is that assessment growth is cumulative, and because it becomes part of the tax base the following year, those changes accumulate over time, which is why the 20% that Council originally identified for CIRF in 2009 has grown over time. And so the same will be true with an additional allocation to CIRF, which is again the strategy around focusing more on renewal. And so just to give an example, over the next 3 years, using the assumption of $1.1 million, it wouldn't be a $110,000 increase per year, resulting in $330,000. It would be $660,000 over the 3-year period. And so over 10 years, we would be talking an additional $6 million for infrastructure renewal than if we had left assessment growth at 20% going into this reserve. Future steps. This is just to remind Council, because we know there is a lot of information in the long-term financial plan that was presented. Staff will be updating the model next year, and we will be doing that in order to feed into the next budget cycle in 2020, which is really when the next Council can make changes to the levers by turning them on and off, or by dialing them up and dialing them down. That particular approach in terms of adjusting what the assumptions are in the long-term financial plan, again, will be part of the decision-making process for the next Council in the 3-year budget. And any other policy or major recommendations that may be coming forward, that will be presented to the next Council, so that they can really put all those puzzle pieces together. Now, future Councils, same thing. This is a living, breathing thing that will change as assumptions change, as needs change, as directions change. And so we would be presenting the long-term financial plan as part of every 3-year budget for Council's consideration in making those budget decisions. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. I've also got Julie and Cassandra here with me, who have a little bit more knowledge on the details of the long-term financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Looking for questions from Council. I have Councillor Whaley.
Well, thank you, Ms. Reynolds, for illuminating discussion on very complicated matters. I'd like to focus a little bit on the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve. You told us that previously it was just kind of used for roads, but that you've opened it up to all infrastructure. What we learned from the asset management tools that have recently been adopted by the city is that over the last while, even while it was just for roads, the reinvestment fund wasn't enough. And now we're opening it up to a broader range of all infrastructure. How's it going to be enough? I didn't get a sense from all the stuff that we're still not putting enough money away, even using the new tools. How can we didn't have enough for just roads, now it's for everything, and it doesn't seem to be enough money to cover everything because we were at such a deficit on the infrastructure as a whole. I just don't see the numbers being fulsome enough to get us where we need to go.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Whaley, through you, Chair Henry. Well, I think you're right. Certainly the solution will not happen overnight, just as the gap itself hasn't occurred overnight. And so these are some of the steps being taken to get us there slowly. And certainly there may be a discussion in the future about how to shorten that gap even more, whether that is, by bringing in more financially or by looking at service levels or a combination of both. But certainly this is the first step, which is why, we feel confident that putting our financial resources in the way that we have by steering them towards CURF a little bit more than we have in the past is the right step to take, but certainly it is not a solution that will resolve everything immediately.
Yeah, but my worry is before we had, CURF was limited to roads. It was specific to roads. So at least roads was getting something. Now it's for everything with just a little bit more money. Doesn't that end up at the end of the day putting us farther behind in terms of infrastructure renewal? Because it's not a lot more money, but it's a lot more things to look after. I don't see how we're getting ahead of, but in fact falling behind.
Thank you, Councillor Whaley. I would like to turn it over to Cassandra for her thoughts as manager of asset management. But before that, I would like to clarify that CURF was for roads and facilities. So there were two asset classes, and certainly they are significant, which is why there was a focus there. But you're right, adding many more is going to be challenging. Ultimately, the asset management plan will be guiding some of that decision making and that prioritization. But will everyone get everything they need immediately? I would say no. But please, Cassandra, if you want to add to that, that would be appreciated.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Whaley, you're correct that the capital infrastructure reinvestment infrastructure CURF doesn't have enough money. However, we have done some prioritization. So when we consolidated CRF and we brought some of the uptown development, we also brought some of the uptown development into CURF. So we're going to be able to prioritize based on holistic needs. And so we are going to use, and we have been using for the 2019 budget, our needs generated through the asset management plan to say what allocation of those reserves will go to the assets. Will they have everything that they need? No, Philippe is correct. They won't have everything, but we're taking steps to make sure we're not needing to draw from tax rate stabilization to buy large assets, which is what we've had to do in the last couple of years.
I think those are certainly important, budgetary aspects. We had to fund a new fire truck out of there because we simply didn't have a source that could manage this. Whereas we know that for the $1.6 billion of asset we manage, they all have needs, and we have to be able to find a way to balance all of them. And 75% of our balance, as I recall, is in roads and facilities anyways, in terms of the gap on infrastructure. So even on a dollar for dollar basis, that continues to see high priority coming out of some of that. Other questions, Council? Councillor Maven.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Philippe, can we go to slide 8 for a minute? Or just one comment on the discussion that was just going on. Just to be clear, sewer, water, and storm sewer, or sanitary water, whatever it's called now, are not included in the CRF either, right? Because they're funded through their own budgets.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So roads and facilities, like Chair Henry said, is the major expenditure that we're facing. Okay. Slide 8 is looking at. Okay. Oops. Can you go just that's it. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So 75% of Waterloo North Hydro surplus this year is about $1 million in dividends. So $750,000 of the dividends would go into this as well. So the annual contribution to CRF is $7.3 million before the change in policy. What is it after the change in policy?
I see that through you, Councillor Maven, through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, I see that Julie is looking up the figure. I don't have it off the top of my head. We need a drum roll.
No, we can wait for Julie. She does quality stuff.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, including the reserve consolidation aspect that was approved in January, the amount increases to 7.9.
Okay, so there was, I thought in the report on the 23rd that there was a reduction in the operating transfer to CRF, significant reduction. I thought it was in the tune of about $4 million, but what do I know? I just don't recall. should say.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, would that, in your mind, be the 10% reduction of assessment growth, perhaps over a longer period of time?
Rather than me guessing, I'll go back and reread it and
Okay.
come back and I'll send you an email. Is that okay,
Okay.
Philippe? Okay, slide 12 then.
Did you say
While you're
12?
finding that, I just identified to close the loop on that. We had a 20-20, 20 cents, 20% to CRF and 20% to CURF, and that's split to 10 and 30, so the 10% that would have gone to CRF originally is now in CIRF, so that hasn't disappeared, it's just moved into the infrastructure balance.
Yeah, and that deals with the infrastructure
Back in
levy that we
January,
currently
yeah.
have, but I'm talking about the normal operating budget contribution. I thought there was a significant reduction, but like that's my memory, and it has its weaknesses. What is the current? We talk about the. Okay, one more slide is off. Which slide 13 then?
Oh, okay.
My bad.
Would it be inappropriate just to follow back up on that, because Cassandra and Julie were looking, and Councillor Maven, perhaps I can send it over to them, just to close the loop on your $4 million question?
Okay.
Okay.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, in the long-term financial plan, we had recommended that we reallocate $1.6 million from CRF over to the operating budget. However, that's not approved, and it's a recommendation that could come back through the 2020 to 2022 budget process. But that's not in the approval. That would be for a future council to consider as part of the next long-term financial plan.
Okay, thanks, Jess. This shows the 3 years going forward, and I was wondering about what is the accumulated percentage right now in terms of dollars that is made annually to CURF from assessment growth, the levy that was put in place by the 2006 council, of which only, I think, Councillor Freeman and Councillor Willie are left from that council.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor
Councillor
Maven.
Beef too, sorry.
Are you referring to the 20%?
Yes.
So from 2009 to 20, so in terms of future, or what has been accumulated up to date?
So the annual contribution cumulative to date. Yes, so not the accumulation, but
Sure.
the annual amount.
Sure.
Yeah.
It'll vary depending on what assessment growth turned out to be, but we can maybe give you an average.
Well, no, I'm looking for the dollars right now, and I'm obviously not being clear.
As of 2018?
As of 2018, how much is in the 2018 budget right now from all the accumulated assessment growth? What's the annual contribution to CURF from that?
Okay, we can
I'm
get
seeing
that.
Julie ready.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, $2.6 million.
Great, thank you very much. So the 2.6 million, and if it changes to 330, which, then in 3 years it'll be almost $4 million going there. Okay, on slide 14 then. Oops, that wasn't
15?
me.
Or,
No, it had to be 13 again, I apologize. 990,000. Okay, I got a note to myself, and it doesn't mean anything to me, so I'm sure it won't mean anything to you. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions from council? I think I'd just ask, just for clarification, of course, this was approved by last FSP and confirmed by council in April, and so these are decisions that have been made. But in terms of the 760,000 that was redirected towards other reserves, what would the option have been other than the choice that staff recommended to council and council chose to be able to deal with those pressures in those reserves?
another choice through you, Chair Henry, would have been to, and from a timing perspective, would have been to bring it forward in the 2019 budget or a future budget for council consideration in light of the long-term financial plan identifying those steps. It just made sense to do it at that time, but that could have been another way to approach the reallocation.
But there would have been pressures for the 2019 budget.
Correct.
And the property tax base.
Correct.
Yeah. So this is a net zero transfer that council did last month to be able to deal with those reserve fund priorities without needing a property tax increase to manage those.
Correct.
All right. I don't see any further questions on this item, and there's nothing specific arising from it. So I'll look to move next item is the consent motion. I just turned my mic off. Do I have a mover for the consent motion? Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Burke. I assume nobody wants either of those two removed, so all those in favor? Carried. So that brings us to staff reports. 6A, renewal of memorandum of understanding with the with WREDC. I understand that there's no presentation here, but staff are available for, including CEO Tony, available for questions from council, and I see Councillor Whaley.
What an interesting organization to watch grow as the economic development liaison person here at the city. We watched Waterloo economic development grow into a mature and exciting and prosperous organization, prosperous in all the prosperity that's brought to Waterloo and Waterloo region. Congratulations, Tony, on excellent early effort to what hopefully will be a long run for you guys. With respect to the funding, I noticed in the report that from 2015 through 2018, the City of Waterloo's contribution has been flatlined at $320,000. Good value for our money, I think. But here we are coming near an end to that agreement. What are you thinking about in terms of city support and regional support going forward?
Tony?
So through Chair Henry, thanks Councillor Whaley for the question and the kind words. I'm a big believer in making sure that we leverage the contribution that's been made by our municipal partners to get federal and provincial support as we expand some investment marketing. I'm quite confident that the base funding, the $2 million, is a significant contribution. When I compare the base funding that, for instance, Toronto Global gets, it's about $2.5, but they also get $2.5 million from the provincial government, $2.5 million from the federal government. So we embarked this year on an ask of both governments to replicate the support, and it's for the reason that we are actually the model that their governance was based on. I spent the first few months of 2016 helping their CEO with their own memorandum of understanding with their 8 funding partners across Toronto region, and certainly I think what is happening in terms of the brain belt that is Waterloo region would warrant us getting a lot more active. So if your question was, are we seeking more from the municipal partners? The short answer is no. We think that the $2 million is a solid base that we will be able to move forward on, but we are seeking more from federal provincial support going forward. Okay.
That's a very good answer, Tony. Justin, did you want to add anything to that?
Okay.
No, you were holding paper and all the things. So anyways, Councillor Maven, you're next.
Thank you. And my issue is with the page 34, the same funding chart that Councillor Whaley referred to. And as we discussed when we originally approved this memorandum of understanding, my concern is the equity as far as the contribution. I think that this should be 100% funded by the region. It's the fairest way of dealing with the costs. It's the fairest way. We all share the assessment growth that this organization is bringing. I have nothing against the organization or the amount of money. It's just a matter of where it's coming from. And if it comes from the City of Waterloo, the cities already have economic development departments. So we fund and we participate, and there's a partnership between the WREDC and the local economic development departments. And I think we have an in-kind contribution already that's probably greater than the 320. But I think that if this memorandum was referred back to the region or whoever, so that we could discuss again the funding arrangement and look at whether or not the region should be the one, the municipal body who actually funds this 100%.
I don't have a comment on that.
That's okay.
I wasn't trying to put you in an awkward spot.
I can comment.
Do you have more, Councillor Maven, or Justin is looking to comment?
Yeah.
No, I'm happy to hear from Justin.
Through you, Chair Henry, just one comment on that. I know that being a direct funding partner does afford us the ability to have direct influence. And I think that that's an important piece for us as we move forward.
And if I may, that's a fair comment, Justin. I don't disagree with that, except for the fact that the region controls and provides the majority of funding anyway. So in reality, what really controls the municipal participation in this is this memorandum of understanding. And so as long as this is in here, you can take out that funding, make it all region, everything else will be cool. And all we have to do is acknowledge that the cities already do participate in economic development locally, to the tune greater. So if an in-kind contribution could come in, that's great. I think there's a pretty close working relationship, and this one you can answer, Tony, between the WEDC and the local economic development groups.
So through the chair, what I would say is that when we got going in early 2016, it was very important because of the fact that there are 3 active resources at the region, and there's a number in at least the 3 cities. The townships essentially don't have the capacity, so they're less inclined to devote resources to economic development. We went through a board prioritization process. We looked at a number of the recommendations and the strategy work that was done in 2015 to set us up, picked a number of lanes in terms of what we would own and what we would support, so that where we landed was that our organization would be customer-facing when it came to FDI, so new greenfield foreign direct investment, that we would own the investment marketing, and then collaborate on retention and expansion with our local active partners in the cities and the townships, and in the case of the townships, provide additional support because they actually don't have the bandwidth to do things like economic development plans. So what we essentially are able to do is that we're transaction oriented. The region helps with providing data and support services when it comes to planning and bylaws and more advocacy issues. And as far as financial engineering, who pays, that is less of a concern to me as long as obviously our budget is maintained. But I would say that the City of Waterloo has probably rightfully, because of its the brain power it has here, has really benefited directly from the partnership. Some of the notable wins include Bosch, that has set up a very significant global center for embedded security in auto tech and automotive, companies like Viessmann, SAP, and then of course the regional plays is well known. So an expansion like Toyota's $1.4 billion that my team and I spent about 5 months on in 2017, working with the province on an automotive exemption of Bill 148. That's the kind of thing that everybody in Waterloo Region, all the townships and city benefit from, including the universities and our college partner as well. So again, where the money comes from and how that's sliced and diced is, I'm not going to comment on that. Okay.
More than true. Thank you.
Councillor Whaley?
I am going to comment on it because I see Tony as a regular visit to the City of Waterloo, a friend to the city, oftentimes meeting with the mayor, meeting with our Economic Development Committee, meeting with others. If all the money came from the region, he might decide that his business is with the region, so maybe that's where he should be hanging out and not doing what he's doing and making sure that he gets to every corner of the region, and we really appreciate that, getting full value for the money.
I think as we move into debate, I'll look to Councillor Whaley to move the motion and Mayor Jaworski perhaps to second it, and I have Mayor Jaworski next on my list.
Well, really it was to emphasize how much we work together as a team, I believe, through Waterloo EDC and our own economic development team. I think we've done wonderful things together, often working on either retention opportunities or growing existing companies right here, or even if I think about our trips that we make in terms of economic development trips, often we go visit existing companies like SAP and affords us the opportunity to solidify their decision of maintaining their base in Waterloo and growing it by telling them about Perimeter Institute for Quantum Computing, things that don't necessarily come up in the day-to-day business dealing from Germany to Canada. And I think that's thanks to the trips that are put together on both sides of the business through the city and through Waterloo EDC that makes things work so well. So certainly a very good part of our investment strategy to invest in Waterloo EDC.
Other comments, Council? Councillor Maven?
Through you, just to be clear, I have nothing against WRDC. I think it's a great organization. I think it's doing quite well. That's not my point. My point is how to equitably contribute $2 million so they continue the good work. And I'm just simply saying that if it was done at the region, it would be spread equally amongst all regional taxpayers. Thank you.
Seeing no other comments, I'll end with mine. One of the things I remember hearing a lot 8 years ago was that we had to talk strongly about putting municipalities together so that we could get a coherent message on the world stage and advocate on behalf of Waterloo region as one large entity, and that was the only way that would work. This has been, I think, an excellent example of the kinds of collaboration that is inherent in our regional structure and in our collaborative model, where we all participate and we all find a way to make sure that together we are strong as Waterloo region and not as one big mighty government to rule them all, but that we can work together and we can work well together. And I think this report is a testament to the fact that we're able to speak with one voice, we've managed a way through, and we've done something, I think, relatively unique in our context, but is not unique around the world, and that's multiple governments working together to speak with one voice to the broader global community that we're trying to attract. So I appreciate all the work you're doing, Tony. I think it's very much appreciated, and this arrangement, I think, the money follows the governance, and it works, I think, fairly well. And good luck on shaking those trees at Queen's Park and Ottawa, and do continue to let us know anything we can do to help in that conversation, because if Toronto's getting that much support, provincially and federally, surely Waterloo region, which comes up more often than most in those conversations at Queen's Park and Ottawa, should be able to get their support as well. So thank you very much. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Maven. Next up we have item B, as I see Councillor Burke leaving as previously noted, final neighbourhood strategy and implementation plan. First up, presentation from Beth Rajavit.
Thank you. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to say thank you to our steering committee for this project. They have done a great job of representing the thoughts and feelings of the community and have been extremely hardworking and committed to this process. Several of them are here tonight, so I just wanted to say thank you to them. I also wanted to quickly say thank you to Lori Ludwig, who, as Manager for Community and Neighborhood Services, has been key to development of this strategy. Lori is retiring at the end of May after 27 years with the city, and her leadership working with neighborhood groups and in the realm of community building has provided us with a strong foundation to build this strategy on. She's also been a great support to me personally during this project as project manager, so thank you very much, Lori. Reminding Council that we've been working on this project for the last couple years. When we first came to Council, we spoke about the purpose of the strategy being to clarify how the city can support residents in creating strong and connected neighborhoods. And what we've really been talking about is what our neighborhood toolbox should look like. So what are the things we should have available to residents that want to do community building in their neighborhood? Our scope of the project was around 5 areas of focus. So looking at social connections, neighborliness, inclusivity, sense of belonging, and placemaking, particularly with a resident-led focus to placemaking. I wanted to just comment quickly on one other element of the scope of the project. Certainly we heard a lot through our consultation process about neighborhood parks. Parks are a critical element of our neighborhoods. They are primary gathering places for our neighborhood groups. And because the city has begun work on a park strategy, rather than making recommendations in this strategy on the matter of parks, we've taken all of that information and shared it with the staff working on the park strategy for their consideration in that project. And those of us working on the neighborhood strategy will continue to be very much aligned with staff leading the park strategy work to make sure that we all fit together to achieve common goals. Our public engagement process for this project was quite extensive and involved multiple phases over the course of the last 2 years. We consulted with over 1,700 community members to inform the strategy, and that included folks from all geographic areas of the city and representing the diversity of our community. We also spoke with more than 25 other cities to talk about what they're doing to support neighborhood community building. And so we had an opportunity to learn a lot from them and to reflect on what would work well for Waterloo. One of the things we heard really loudly from the community is that the tools we already have in place to support neighborhoods are really valued and effective. So things like our neighborhoods coordinator, who provides a lot of hands-on support to our neighborhood groups. Programs like Partners in Parks, the outdoor rink program, affiliated neighborhood associations, and other programs, all are really important to our neighborhood groups. And what they wanted to see was that we would build on these programs and do more to help them do great things in their neighborhoods. Before we, I just wanted to shift to the strategy itself. Now, we presented a draft of the strategy to council back in January and then did a final round of engagement. The community was very positive in reception of the draft, so we don't see a lot of major changes, but we did make some revisions here and there to better reflect what we heard from the community. And where we landed in terms of a vision with the steering committee is that the vision for the strategy is that Waterloo is a city of caring, vibrant, engaged neighborhoods where everyone belongs. And we also identified 6 guiding principles. These were important to not only developing the strategy, but will also be important for implementing the strategy, as it will help staff make decisions around which direction to go in. And those principles are: volunteers are at the root of great neighborhoods. Every resident can help build strong neighborhoods. Neighborhood community building should be resident-led and should be inclusive. City departments must work together to support resident-led and delivered neighborhood initiatives. And that collaboration with community partners is a key to achieving the strategy vision. The strategy also identifies 3 goals. The first is encourage neighborhood interactions. And this goal is about finding those folks in neighborhoods who have an interest in getting to know their neighbors and providing them, encouraging them to get out and connect with their neighbors, and communicating and sharing with the community why being a good neighbor is important and how they can do that. The second goal, empower neighbors to lead. This is really about providing people with the tools to take their ideas and make it a reality. So often residents know they have an idea, but they don't know how to get it up and running. And so the recommendations connected to this goal are about providing them with all the tools they need to go from idea to implementation. And number 3, commit to a corporate city culture that supports neighborhood-led and delivered initiatives. This is about shifting our focus, so being open to exploring new ideas, to thinking about how we might do things differently to help our neighborhoods. Our neighborhood groups are very creative people, they're very committed, and we want to make it easy for them to take their ideas and make it happen. There are 18 actions in the strategy that will help us achieve these goals. But I think it's also important to note that the strategy requires a broadening of our support for all neighborhoods. So the goals and actions outlined in the strategy collectively point to a need to broaden our approach and the range of tools that we provide to neighborhoods. Historically, the city has focused on its affiliated neighborhood associations and provided them with tools and support. About half of the city has an affiliated neighborhood association. What we know is that there's lots of neighborhoods that don't have an association, maybe don't want an association, or have chosen a different route, and that's okay. Not everyone needs to have the same approach to doing neighborhood community building, and so our range of tools needs to reflect that diversity across neighborhoods. So that's what we're here to present to you today, that sort of broadening of our scope in terms of the kinds of neighborhoods we work with, but also the range of tools that we'll provide to neighborhoods to help them. To give you some highlights of what the action items look in a more tangible sense and what this will look like from an implementation plan perspective, we've developed a 5-year implementation plan and articulated what we'll do in each year. So in the first year of the plan, one of the first things we'd want to do is establish the Neighborhood Leaders Committee. So bringing together the leaders in our neighborhoods to learn from each other, to help each other, and to help us as we implement the strategy. Increasing foundational funding for neighborhood associations. The Town and Gown Committee has already begun work around community cohesion in our neighborhoods around our post-secondary institutions. We'd like to make improvements to the Neighborhood Matching Fund to make it easier and clearer for the community members about what this program is and how they can access it and what they can use it for. We'd like to streamline processes and revisit policy decisions to see where we can make some changes that make things easier for the community to bring their ideas to life. And adopt a let's explore approach across all departments. Some of these things we've already started to do. So working with transportation services and bylaw, there's already work underway about streamlining processes and looking at bylaws and how we might tweak things to make it easier for neighborhoods. And certainly we've already been having discussions about this let's explore approach, so that our first response to a new and seemingly unusual idea isn't no, it's let's sit down and talk about this and see how we can make it work. In year 2, we'd like to start a neighborhood summit. So bringing together both our neighborhood groups and anyone else interested in the neighborhood to come together annually to learn from each other, to talk to each other for some training and networking opportunities, to fund the development of more community gardens and outdoor rinks, to develop a neighborhood website. This was probably one of the things the community was most looking for from this strategy, a place to access information, how-to guides and other materials on how to get up and running your neighborhood activities. Securing more support from the Volunteer Action Center for our neighborhood groups who do a lot of work with volunteer recruitment, retention, and recognition. Establishing a equipment program to get neighborhoods the tents and tables and games and other items they need to run neighborhood events. A neighborhood asset map of spaces in neighborhoods, and a microgrant program to help people that just have a small idea and maybe need $100 or $200 to get things up and running. In years 3 to 5, we would implement a community connector type program for neighborhoods that are looking to create more relationships among neighbors. A program that provides residents with the types of leadership skills they need to take charge and build other neighbors, get other neighbors on boards to do things in their neighborhood. Additional support for volunteer recruitment, retention, and recognition. A neighborliness campaign, so getting the word out about why being a neighbor is so important and what that can look like. And then a program to help neighborhoods that currently feel they maybe don't have a strong sense of identity. You know, Mary Allen, Laurelwood, those kind of neighborhoods. Everybody in those neighborhoods knows where they live, but there are places in town where people might not have that same sense of recognition for their neighborhood, and so we'd like to help them with that. In terms of the financial requirements for the strategy, we've talked a lot about what the strategy will do. This is about the resources we'll need to make all of that happen. So this is a combination of funding for new and expanded programs, but along with these, we're looking for additional staff to help do the work. The staff that we have is probably the most important resource that our community uses to help with their neighborhood community building work. We have one staff dedicated to that now, our neighborhoods coordinator, and so to do the additional expanded scope and take on these new programs, we're looking for a second position, a neighborhood projects coordinator. As an interim strategy, we would be funding that position starting in September through existing capital funds, and then we would bring that forward for consideration to Council in 2020 for the 2020 to 2022 budget process. The other dollars are for those expanded and new programs. The total operating impact by 2023 is an increase of $249,000 and a capital total of $110,000 over that 5-year period. What does investment in this strategy do for the City of Waterloo? Well, we heard a lot about the great things that are happening in neighborhoods when we were developing this strategy. And we think that this investment will help proliferate these kinds of things happening on a day-to-day basis. So for example, we'll see more neighbors helping each other, like the story of a neighbor who saw their new neighbor, new to Canada, struggling with the first big snowfall of the year, and got out the snowplow and helped them with that. They were trying to shovel with a toy shovel. The story about a young girl and her the adult woman living next door who developed a friendship over playing with the dolls out on the lawn. Stories about neighbors making their neighborhoods great places to live. So getting together to have community gardens, to mulch trails, to do litter cleanups in their neighborhoods. And more great spaces. So places like Brighton Yards, which through the Neighborhood Matching Fund has added sun shelters that allow the kids to go out even on the hottest days to play with each other outside rather than being stuck in front of their screens indoors. And then more community gatherings like the Grand Porch Party, where people get together, chat with each other, socialize, and get to share their talents with each other. So these are the kinds of things that an investment in the neighborhood strategy will get for the city and for our residents. In terms of getting started, this will take time. It is a 5-year implementation plan, and I think it's important that we take that time and get these things right and continue to have discussion with the community as we make these changes. So the Neighborhood Leaders Committee would continue to be a source of guidance for us as we move this forward, and we would continue to engage with the community. In the meantime, it's important that residents, staff, and council should first connect with our neighborhoods coordinator, Julie Legg, who's in the audience today, as a first step to discussing neighborhood project and ideas. Julie can provide a concierge service for anyone that's looking to do something in their neighborhoods, so people don't have to scramble around amongst departments. They can go to Julie, and then Julie will help them find out where they need to go. As I mentioned, we'll also be engaged in the park strategy development. We hope to come back to council in the summer with the new Neighborhood Matching Fund policy and a new approach for the Grants Committee. And we would be looking to hire the Neighborhoods Project Coordinator start in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Very detailed report at the end of a very important process. Questions for Beth at this time? We'll get into debate after we hear from delegations.
Just a comment or two.
Brief comment.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you, Beth and Laurie and staff for all the work on this. I just want to say that like in my neighborhood, there's neighborhood associations, and they all have Facebook pages, and it's amazing to me how people meet people and connect with each other through Facebook, and even those neighborhood associations that are different neighborhood associations that have Facebook pages connect with each other. So I think a lot of that's already happening in our neighborhoods, and yeah. So anyway, this is great, and it's a working document, a working policy through the next 5 years anyway. So yeah, thanks for all your hard work. Looking forward to it.
I'm going to reinterpret that comment as a question about the website support and the Facebooking that people are doing, because I do wonder about that. Okay. As someone that had jobs in other places where we constantly tried to replace things people were already at, and yet people kept asking for new things exactly like this. So I've seen this movie before, but I'm curious on your take, having been in the thick of it.
Now? Okay. So one of the things we heard from the community is that they do have these Facebook pages, but they want to be able to connect across neighborhoods as well. And so the website would be a couple different things. One, us sharing information. So let's say Laurelwood has put on a particular event. We could do a write-up about how to do that kind of event in your neighborhood, put it up on the website so that someone else can find that and start that in their neighborhood. Looking at other cities' websites of this type, they might have a list of 60, 70 ideas of great things you can do in neighborhoods. Sometimes people just need an idea to get them going. They know how, they have the how-to and the desire, but they're maybe not the ideas people. And then the other piece is that our neighborhood groups said they wanted to talk to each other more. We had a summit where we brought all the neighborhood leaders together, and it was, you know, my purpose in having the summit was to get input into the strategy. But every time we took a break, there was so much chatter, so much problem solving, sharing cards, writing notes, getting email addresses so that they could go afterwards and problem solve together. And so they're looking for a space to do that online as well.
That's useful clarification on distinguishing those two buckets for me. I appreciate that. Councillor Duro?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Excellent report. Thank you very much. I know this has been a big project for you over the last couple of years, so I appreciate all the time and effort, and also to all the community members that gave their time and effort to make this great. It seems almost like a little bit nitpicky to kind of go through it now and ask questions, but I guess that's what we're supposed to do here, right? So one of the things, of course, I come from uptown, and we're fortunate enough at this point that we have a lot of pride, I guess, in our neighborhoods. And I know for a fact that many of our neighborhoods have looked at getting neighborhood signage, especially because one got one and no one else did, MACA. So, and I did see on page 20 that is something that you are encouraging people to do. Getting funding for that, it was like the first year I was elected, and it was thanks Mr. Rapp, but it was difficult to make that all happen. And so I'm wondering, how do we make sure that it's easier for neighborhoods to do that? I mean, are we expecting people to pay out of their pockets for new street signs, or how is that going to work?
Through you, Chair Henry. So a couple things I'll comment on. We've already begun discussions with Joel Cotter and his team around the sign bylaw and what opportunities there might be, and I think that was a really good start. There was definitely, a synergy on both sides that we could, talking to each other just in a preliminary conversation, that we could find some good solutions. I think we've also done some work through the Neighborhood Matching Fund to fund signage in a couple neighborhoods. So that might be an opportunity. And then we'd have to look, I think, at a longer term, what kind of things neighborhoods were wanting to do. So are they looking for, the entrance sign, which we've recently funded one through Neighborhood Matching Fund, or are they looking for something bigger? And if it was something bigger, we may have to sort of explore what that looks like a bit more and what the opportunities are. I think there's opportunities too. A lot of neighborhood associations have had good success working with the business community, so we might be able to look at those kinds of options as well.
One of the things, actually, what's interesting is Councillor Maven and I were talking about this before council today, but it was one of the things that I had highlighted in this report, and it's the wrong kind of signs. It's the graffiti signs on all of the hydro boxes and et cetera in our neighborhoods. And so one of the something that you had talked about was establishing a neighborhood-led community art program with support from the city's arts and culture team. And I'm wondering if there's any way to, to work with Hydro and Bell and some of they've got some big advertising space, if you will, for what our neighborhoods like and want. And so I'm wondering, that's pretty specific, but they are in all of our neighborhoods. That's one thing that's that we all have in common. So,
through you, Chair Henry, in working with the Arts and Culture team on this recommendation, we've been really looking at a program in Halifax, which does exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. So they do a lot of intersection paintings, sidewalk paintings, but there's also work around the electrical boxes and those kind of pieces. So they've had great success in that kind of model. But I also know that the Arts and Culture team is having discussions with Hydro and others around some of those opportunities already. So the groundwork is being laid.
I'd love to see that actually happen in my lifetime. It'd be amazing. So the only other thing I wanted to talk about was I'm really happy to see that this neighborhood summit is in black and white and on the books. I think that that's really important. The one thing that I did want to just flag as a concern is creating an online application, I guess a platform for our neighborhoods can be. I'm just really nervous that we're going to go out that this is going to be a very expensive and not comprehensive application. So I'm wondering what's your vision for that?
Yeah. Through you, Chair Henry. We spoke with the City of Kitchener about this one because they, a few months ago, released their own neighborhood website. I noticed that they've recently won a couple of awards for it. So we chatted with them about what theirs look like and the costs of that and how they plan to keep it current and up to date, and very much learned from their experience around the costing and the operational requirements for this. So we feel we've costed it at an appropriate level, and also having spoken with corporate communications, that they have some ideas around how we can make this work as well and are very supportive.
Any other questions at this time? If not, I'll say thank you, Beth. Don't go too far. And we'll go to our delegations. First up is Cindy Watkin.
Good afternoon, Chair Henry and members of council. Today I'm not exactly wearing my Eastbridge Neighborhood Association hat, but as I'm here as part of the committee, steering committee. When asked to be part of this group, it was an easy decision for me. I believe in the power of volunteers, I believe in this city, and I also believe that strong neighborhoods add to the quality of life for everyone. For almost 2 years, the team has worked very hard with Beth's great leadership so that we could assist with the strategy on many levels. She and Janet were committed to end up with the best plan for Waterloo, and to me this is the potential, if implemented, to make our fine city even better than it already is. As one who's been volunteering here for almost 17 years, and as a leader, it's been extremely and incredibly rewarding. That's not to say there aren't challenges at times, be it a no to a proposed event, or paperwork in an abundance for a simple request, and perhaps, importantly, the ongoing need for more volunteers. This strategy addresses these and so much more. A micro-grant simply would give neighbors who maybe don't have an association the access for a small amount of funds for a one-time event or to kick off something great, to connect their streets within their apartment buildings and their community. Adding existing financial and in-kind support is much needed, and base operational funds for all affiliated associations make sense to bring forth new groups, strengthen the existing neighborhoods, and also encourages people to simply try. The Let's Explore philosophy is one I find especially beneficial and could create options where in the past they wouldn't have even been considered. It just would have been a no. This shift could have so many positive impacts. There's also potential, as Beth mentioned, for collaboration through this with the upcoming park strategy. Volunteer retention and recognition have always been very important to me and something as a leader I was committed to. Volunteers are priceless. They aren't unpaid workers, but are much more than that. In giving their time and expertise, everyone can truly make a difference. This strategy allows for additional training and support for volunteers and the opportunity to bring neighborhood groups and leaders together, all of which I feel are necessary to empower people and also to create future leaders. An additional staff would allow more time to be utilized implementing many of the real tasks of the strategy, and the interim plan provides a realistic way to begin. I think we all agree on how important vibrant neighborhoods are to Waterloo, and this plan allows the foundation to create more, strengthen existing ones, and promote neighborliness as well. The vision is one that pretty much sums it up for me, while the rest of the strategy is how to make it reality. Waterloo is a city of caring, vibrant, engaged neighborhoods where everyone belongs. It's been a pleasure to be part of the committee, thank you, and I really hope you all see the potential in what we've created together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and thank you as well, I think, on behalf of all of council for your work through this process, and through you to the broader committee who have volunteered their time and their expertise and their thoughts throughout this process to make sure that we had this on the right track and going in the right direction. And I know Beth very much appreciates it, as we all do. So I'll look to council for any questions at this time. Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair. I'll channel Councillor Freeman for a bit, since she's your ward councillor, but to say thank you for all that you've done to make Eastbridge so bright and cheery and involved in that. But what I would say is, even when I attend Eastbridge events, you know, it's the volunteers who make it happen, the board who makes it happen. But still, there's, even though I look at the Eastbridge Neighborhood Association truly as a force, it's still not without its challenges in terms of getting out volunteers. The citizens will come out if you put together the party, but you still need the hands to roll up the sleeves. Maybe you could talk a bit about that, that even though we have some great neighborhood, like fantastic neighborhood associations, they too need help.
I do, true. Thank you. I agree. And that's where I kind of hit on, it can be challenging. And even in our board, it's the same crew of people year after year after year. And that is a bit of a challenge. And any of us who've worked in volunteer groups know that. It's fostering a sense of community that I feel is important, so that people feel that they aren't just there to put in their time or whatever. They want to be part of the community. And you've seen it at our egg hunt recently, or if we ask people to step up on our Facebook page, we get a response right away if we need something. But ongoing commitment, it's harder to get new people to do that on a long-term basis. Therein lies where I think the training would come in handy, and the networking summit. I think those are fabulous ideas to deal with challenges like that. So those of us in charge know you're not alone, or this worked for us, or this didn't work over here. Because what works in Eastbridge won't be the same as maybe uptown. And we're fortunate we have caring people who want to continue to foster that. So slowly we get more people, but it's not easy. I don't know. I don't think there's a short answer.
Yeah, and certainly these are challenges shared by the voluntary sector, writ large. I know the backdrop is not easy. Other questions for Cindy, Council? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate the work and the words. Second delegation is Jan Dai. Jan?
Hello, how are you all? It's just a little bit of a deja vu when you guys were talking about your long-term financial planning. I remember us having fun with the numbers, and Diana, I really appreciate that. Finally understand the numbers. Right? Anyway, so I was here as part of the, I was part of one of the residents, one of the neighbors, I guess, or on the panels, which we met on a fairly regular basis. 10 times, 12 times, I don't know how the time was, over the 2-year period. And Beth and group, they did an absolutely fabulous job. It's a great report, and things are really moving well forward. But I do have a couple of concerns, and this is not new to Beth. And if we go to the next slide, I guess I control those now. And it's good. We all know why we need neighborhoods and everything else. But if you look at the key success factors, residents identified parks as a primary asset for community building. That's certainly referred to this. It's very important to that. And you have a park strategy moving forward. That's all great. I think it's really, really good. But I'm just really afraid that that message may not get through well enough. That's my concern. I'll tell you why. Because it being the place part of it, what kind of physical location do we need, what kind of supports do we need in those locations, we didn't talk about those things as in these sessions. We talked about other stuff. Other stuff is really important, but we didn't talk about this type of stuff. And the way I think about parks and neighborhood locations, it's like if you have a child or an orphan child. You can provide all the support services that you want. You can provide them money, you can provide them with counseling, you can provide them with mentoring, you can provide them with toys, provide them all kinds of things. But unless they have a bed to call home, those things, it's like pushing a rope up the hill, or a ball up the hill. You have to have that first foundational piece. It has to be in place first, before these other things really make a lot of sense to do. Yeah, they'll be helpful on the periphery, but until you get that fundamental piece in place, those things won't have the impact they really should have. And there are many communities in Waterloo that don't have that foundational piece. I live in Beechwood. We have these pools and tennis courts and active communications. It's really, really good, and you see that really, really strong communities. Others have nothing. They don't even have a corner. And that's really important. So how does that message get through the Parks Committee? So then I looked at the strategy, the strategy plan objectives for the Parks Plan. This is their 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are their 5 items, right? And I sort of looked through it. Where does neighborhoods come up in this? It's barely mentioned in that plan. That big plan, it's $300,000 looking at all the parks around the city and all the ESL lands and naturalized lands and things like that. There's hardly a word. I saw one word in all the descriptions I read that even had the word neighborhood in it. right? So it's a big, big plan. So it's very, for me, it seems like it's much more operational. How do we manage those assets? What are the bigger policy issues around that? And it doesn't deal with what kind of facilities do we need for our neighborhoods? What's the core piece we need for each individual neighborhood? All right, so we talked a little about the inventory, current park policy, and determine policy gaps. Does that cover it? Not quite sure those words really do it for me. Or look at the top piece there, lands, city lands designated and managed as parkland and environmental lands. Does that really pick up what we're trying to do with our neighborhood parkheads or our landing spots, where we have our community home? Does that really get picked up in those lands? And my feeling is it doesn't, right? So I'd really like to encourage council to be bold to make a statement, right? Can you make a statement? And I think that all the literature supports this, that the park strategy should include an objective that every neighborhood has an identified gathering spot. Where's the center of our community that we can call this our community center? And what's in that space? Is it a gazebo? Is it a playground? Is it a picnic table? Is it a barbecue? Is it tennis courts? Is it a basketball court? What is that? What's that core foundation going to be? And right now, I think we just have because there's a bit of a policy gap between the two, that's just going to be missed. And we talked about an annual report. How do you report to council every year? Well, how do you report progress on this? Whose responsibility is this? Is this the park's responsibility, talking about what we're doing in the neighborhoods here? Or is this the neighborhood community, which doesn't have a mandate to talk about it? So it's just falling between the gaps. I think that's, if council can try to wrestle with that and try to help make that work, I think it would be a big, big step forward. Otherwise, great work has been done. It's a great step forward. But I'm just a little bit concerned that it's falling between the cracks here a little bit. And those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Jan. Any questions of Jan from council? Seeing none. Seeing Councillor Durrell? Jan?
Oh, no, just okay. I'd like to...
For staff?
Yeah,
that's why I differentiated first. So seeing no questions for Jan, questions of staff, Councillor Durrell.
Would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Through you, Chair Henry. I will say that the neighborhood strategy is underway. The project manager is in the audience as we speak, because I think it was important to Barb McGee-Turner to hear the conversation today. Barb and I have been working closely together, and we have shared a lot of information with each other. And already we've had meetings with the consultants to hear about what the neighborhoods are looking for. And so things are early, in the early stages, but we're off to a very positive start in terms of the park strategy reflecting the needs of the community and creating a park system that aligns with the goals of the neighborhood strategy and what the community wants to see happening in their neighborhoods.
So is it fair to say then that in Jan's last PowerPoint, that things have changed a little bit then from the beginning of what the original park strategy, with a greater focus on neighborhoods? I mean, Jan raises a good point, so we want to make sure there's nothing falling through the gaps.
Through you to Chair Henry, Jan's comments are spot on. And I think sometimes where there might be a bit of an oversight is the language we use, whether it be in an RFP versus what would resonate with a resident around the language used to bring some additional strategy work to this city. What was great was we did meet with Barb's team and the consultants to ensure that the language that didn't seem to be there that might resonate with residents, we spoke on behalf of that point to say when you're talking to residents and where you're talking to residents will be key for them to understand this is about neighborhood parks more than it is about sports parks. And we have a different strategy working on that. And it's important to distinguish the two because they are two very different things for different purposes. So, but they got it right away. So I think in going forward, the type of communication strategy is going to be key to the residents understanding what kind of questions we are asking and that it is to resonate with neighborhood parks.
Beth?
Through you, Councillor Henry. Just to add to that, I think we've started discussions when we very first started the neighborhood strategy 2 years ago about how this connected to the park strategy, and have been continuing to have those discussions as we move forward. And so I think things have evolved from maybe where it was originally conceived of, you know, more than 2 years ago, to the work that Barb is now leading today. And, you know, we've continued to have discussions with parks around the strategy. Certainly the work around community gardens and outdoor rinks that we've proposed has a big role for parks, and some of the other, you know, process pieces. And the parks team has been very positive about working with us to find solutions there. So I think as we move forward, as I said, the park strategy is just kind of getting up and running. There'll be consultation coming over the next few months. We'll continue to kind of talk to each other. Things will continue to evolve, and we can be responsive.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whaley?
I was interested to think about the changing face of Waterloo and how all our new neighborhoods seem to be vertical neighborhoods or big, tall buildings. And you identified this as a challenge for you going forward. But you know, the condo corporations who run these buildings don't see themselves as neighborhoods. They see themselves as condo associations. What in this program can capture the imaginations of these buildings to begin to see themselves as vertical neighborhoods? Important part of our new Waterloo, and how are you going to overcome that big challenge?
Through you, Councillor Henry. I think this will be one of the biggest challenges in moving the strategy forward. We are fortunate to be part of a group of about 25 to 30 other cities who are also doing neighborhood strategies, whether developing them or implementing them. And so we have an opportunity to talk to cities that are maybe a bit bigger than us and are more intensified already, Toronto, Vancouver, and others. And so they have already started to do work around looking at vertical neighborhoods. Vancouver in particular has a very high rate of people who live in high-rise buildings, and so part of their work around neighborhoods is really focused on tools and opportunities that are designed specifically to encourage neighborhood work. I think one of the challenges we'll have is how do we get through the door in the first place to find the person in that building that we can set up to start building that neighborhood. We did some preliminary work last summer to try to find, you know, either the developer or the property manager or the chair of the board of the condominium. With privacy legislation, it's a bit tough to find some of that contact information, but you know, that is a first step, and so we would continue to build on that as well.
As a follow-up, you know, in the last 10 years or so, Canada Post has instituted these community mailboxes, which so many people see as a curse, but it's one of the interesting ways that neighbors meet neighbors. And I've really seen since the beginning of this a lot of grumbling, but a lot of neighborhood connections there. My suggestion with these vertical neighborhoods is some of the things that they have in common are condominium boards, and you know, they're not unlike what Cindy Watkins does in terms of being a volunteer organization. The members who sit on the boards are volunteers, and if there's some way that we can as a staff tap into these volunteer condo boards, I think there's going to be a great leap forward by giving them information that they are welcome, that they are part of the urban fabric, and an important one.
Sure.
Yeah,
and then we'll get it on the floor and move it, since I think that's the part of the agenda we're on now.
But I think condos, but also apartments as well. I wouldn't want to forget about them. So I think that I just wanted to make that note.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly some notes in the strategy down the line around multi-residential dwellings, which includes both, you know, multi-residential condominium ownership and multi-residential, you know, rental ownership, and then of course there's the condominium corporations that are primarily the condos are primarily owned by investors who then rent them out to people, which is even more complicated because it straddles the two, and you even lose the connection that people have in the middle. So there's a lot of meat on those bones to try to tackle and get at. Can I get someone to put the motion on the floor so that we can then move into proper debate? Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Veith. Comments on the motion on the floor? I see Mayor Jaworski, and then I'll go around the horn.
In my case, I want to talk about two possible amendments. Should I do it now? Go ahead. Okay.
Now's a good time.
So the motion as written talks about what we can do over the coming 5 years. And what really struck me when we looked at this report, when we saw it first in draft format, is we've done a lot of consultation on this, 2 years of consultation as we've heard, and we're ready to go. Except for the fact that really our next major budget will be the 2020 3-year budget. And I think there's opportunities for us to take action in 2018 and actually set the next council of 2019 have the opportunity to take further action, because you can see resources are limited. So with respect to the recommendations, so item number 4, that implementation of action items identified for year 1, 2019, to begin in 2018 where resources allow. So that's what's currently written. And further, that council approved $10,000 to be funded from the council community priority contingency reserve to kick off the neighborhood strategy and implementation plan in 2018. And my thinking on this in working with staff was that this would give the opportunity for micro grants to be given out already, and some other things that staff are working on, whatever they can pull in to their current work plan. And this was a number that was discussed with the management team. And then item number 7, a new item, that the specific items totaling $40,000 from Appendix B, Table 1, allocated for the 2020 to 2022 years, which are years 2 to 4 of the next budget, be referred to 2019, next term of council, the budget pressure list as follows. For foundational funding increase for neighborhood associations, $10,000. The new microgrant program, $5,000. Increased funding for the Volunteer Action Center, the need that was identified here. A neighborhood summit, $5,000. Volunteer recognition increase, as we've seen from, heard in even our best neighborhood associations still have trouble getting volunteers, $5,000. And then finally, in-kind support increase for things like printing, rentals at city facilities, $5,000. And that's a total of $40,000.
Okay, if that's friendly to the mover, or you seconded, who moved it, Councillor Durrell? Yes, sorry, I got you. So if that's fine with Councillor Durrell, then we'll consider that part of the main motion and open for further discussion. Conversation, Council? Councillor Whaley, then Councillor Maiden.
I appreciate the Mayor's proposed amendments. His intention is to kickstart this whole plan immediately, and I'll support it for sure.
Through you, Chair Henry, and the Mayor already knows I don't support the amendment. I just find the timing during an election year, it isn't the right thing to do. There's an optics issue with it that just isn't right. And while I'm sure that's not the intention, and I don't want to insinuate that at all, but just the optics of it is that this council is going to be giving neighborhood wards money to do certain things. And I don't think that's good for the program. I don't think it's good for the city. Secondly, if I could ask a question of Beth, the two programs, I met with Barb and the consultants as well, and the park strategy from that point of view and this park strategy, where do they merge? The neighborhood strategy and park strategy, sorry.
Through you, Councillor Henry. I think they merge in terms of the work for the park strategies, looking at what are our parks for? Why do we provide parks? And how, if we're once we've determined why we provide parks, and I think it's clear from the neighborhood strategy, one of the purposes of parks is as community gathering places. What does that mean for the future of our parks? How do we have to move forward in terms of making sure our parks have the right assets to allow neighborhood groups to gather? So it could be things like potable water, electrical, more picnic tables, more staff support in terms of community groups that want to set up and have an event in a park. Right now it's challenging for them to always get the attention and the support they need to plan the event in that physical space. So I think part of the park strategy will look at what are our assets in parks, what is not there, and how do we make our parks the right kind of places for the range of things the community wants to do in those spaces.
Okay, and to Jan's point before, and again, I want to just finish off this a little bit, Beth, but Westvale Community Association, and I was a little disappointed they weren't on the steering committee, but I saw Tim Oswald's name, and he was one of the creators of that. So to me, they're one of the best neighborhood associations in the city. They don't ask for any money. They go around and do a toonie collection once a year and go knocking on doors, door to door with a pail looking for a toonie donation. But they've got an open space, and that open space is used so creatively. A piece of land, they have fireworks display there that's almost as good as University of Waterloo. It's not quite as good, but almost. And they bring in carnivals, they have corn roasts, they have this, that, and the other thing going on, all in that open space. They create their own park environment. They make the park what they need it to be at any given point in time. And it would be nice to see some sort of reference in here to the neighborhood association about a gathering place, a meeting place, or open space. Because I don't see that reference anywhere. Glad Jan pointed it out.
Through you, Chair Henry. We have included in the strategy sort of a summary of what we heard through the community, I think, around parks. I think it does reflect what you've noted. And I think that's one of the things that we've already had discussion with the park strategy team about, is that the expectations and interests of the community are changing. So having a picnic in the park with 30 people, maybe that used to be what neighborhood groups were doing. But things are growing, and some neighborhood groups, Westvale in particular, is looking to do much bigger things.
Right.
And so how do we make our parks work for the full range of things that the community wants to do?
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, Council? Mayor?
Yeah, just for clarity, on the items to do for this year, the $10,000 from the Council Committee Priority Contingency Reserve. I'd just like to point out that, we still have a half a year of work left to do in this term of council, so we need to keep doing this work of this term of council. And this is a budgeted but unallocated item, so it's not net new money coming from the taxpayers. It's money that we've already allocated through our budgeting process annually, and it does give the kickstart. However, I know Councillor Maven is probably very supportive of the rest of the items on there, and so maybe as a suggestion, we might want to take item 4 separately.
Yeah, I had some suggestions I was about to make as well to the same end, so I appreciate the traffic direction. Just a question, Beth, on how staff would respond to the motion as it's made in terms of an allocation that comes forward this year of $10,000 in microgrants, and how staff would envision that sort of rolling out, and whose responsibility those would be to administer.
Through you, Councillor Henry. The mayor commented a couple things. The microgrants program would be an easy one to get up and running. We could also look at, some of our other opportunities in terms of perhaps doing some more training this year, doing some work around the internal culture piece, and looking at sort of bylaw opportunities. So there's a lot of things that we can do this year. We might also be able to speed up implementation of the Neighborhood Leaders Committee to help them get up and running as soon as possible. And they'll be a big help in terms of guidance, and we didn't budget any dollars for that work, so having some resources to help that group along would be extremely helpful. And I think, we can look at other pieces and say, can we start a small bit of it now, even if we can't get the full bit until 2019?
And just to be clear, if a microgrant project is launched, the decisions on who awards those aren't applications that come to council or the councillor. Those would come very much internally or to other committees of volunteer members.
Yeah, through you, Councillor Henry. The microgrant we're envisioning as different than the neighborhood matching fund. So neighborhood matching fund is up to $3,000. We've tweak that from time to time. And so groups go through a more lengthy application process to access those funds, and there's a committee of residents who make the decision about those grants. For the micro grant, we'd be looking at, $100, $200, $300, a small amount of money, a very short or almost non-existent application process, and staff making those decisions. So, what we'd like to do is put some guidelines in place and get that up and running right away. And then over the time, we can sort of learn how it works and improve that process for the community so that people aren't waiting 6 months to get something going in their neighborhood.
Appreciate that additional diligence. Certainly, this is a strategy whose time has come here in Waterloo, and I'm glad to see that we're finding ways to move it along as quickly as we can. Okay, so seeing that and no further comments, I'll take the vote on everything but item 4. Correct, Councillor Maven? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. And then on item 4, I'll take that. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Maven. Thank you very much. Next up, we have...
Is this Laurie's last meeting at council?
That's true. I meant to.
Is it?
I meant to pause.
Well, congratulations.
We'll miss you.
Not for you, Brian.
There you go. Or you can take the rest of the afternoon off now that you got about an hour left. Next up, King Street Streetscape Project, LED lighting structures and associated works. I don't see a presentation attached to this one, unless I'm wrong. So just questions if Council has any for staffs. I assume Councillor Durrell would like to say something.
I'm making eyes at the new Uptown BIA Executive Director. Did you want to say something, Delegate, on this? I know you guys wrote a note. Would you like to say something? That'd be awesome. Is that okay if we have a few?
If you can cajole somebody to be a delegate, I'll take them.
Well, this is the new, we haven't met her yet either.
I think that could be helpful as well.
It's been a while. Thank you. Yeah, through you, Councillor Henry, I'm very thrilled to be here and representing the Uptown BIA. I know that this is a project that we've been very supportive of since the very beginning, and we really do feel like this beautiful lighting project that is being planned will help to create a really vibrant Uptown, and it will help make it more welcoming, more safe, beautiful, and a walkable destination. So we're very supportive of the project.
Anything else you'd like to make sure that your new executive director says?
We should say welcome.
I think we should, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Would you care to do that, Councillor Durrell?
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy Van
Kelsbeek.
Just throwing an extra one. I'm married to a Dutchman, but so is our new executive director. And you've been on the job for
2 weeks.
14 days. Yes. Amazing. And jumped in. So we're really excited to have you. The Community Foundation in Stratford's loss is our gain for sure. So thank you and welcome to the team.
Thank you, Councillor.
Boy, we are in it in Uptown right now. So you're jumping in the thick of it.
Yes, ma'am.
I did want to actually point out to the gentleman to my right. Did you not help design these lighting structures? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
That's a question of staff. That's fair.
Yes, I did design it, definitely with their help to move it through. It started off with just an idea about how do we incorporate public art, but also illuminate the trees, yet also bring some sort of elegance and class to the streetscape. So we started off with creating 2 prototypes, option 1, option 2, and we've had a variety of people in the city and council to come visit them. Everybody voted, and option 2 was most selected. So we took that idea and we developed it further. So now we're sort of looking at implementing within the streetscape. So it's turned out very well.
Thank you. And I will say, nothing like it existed, so it's a made in Waterloo product, correct?
And given the Uptown BIA here is the second oldest BIA in Ontario, the country, and many parts beyond, I think it's important that this is a Made in Waterloo solution for really a Made in Waterloo idea in terms of business areas and improvement. Councillor Whaley?
Well, your idea is a good one. It's beautiful. We have an example out in front of City Hall, which has been turned on for the last week or so, and I've been getting emails about it. It's very exciting. So congratulations on such a brilliant concept. Hope it takes you far. With respect to the almost unlimited color choices, one of the things I thought about, and I'll get your comment on, is you can turn it up to be incredibly vibrant, but you can also turn it down to be a little softer for perhaps, celebrations or regular use. Is that a simple thing to do? Is that a reprogrammed, or do we have to have it on full blast, Disney-esque if you want, sometimes, and quieter other times?
Color-wise, we have 16.7 million options.
16.7 million.
Different colors, yes.
Is that all?
That's all. So very limited range. Yes, and then from there, envision a stereo, 0 to 100. We can turn it to anything in between. And then that's the challenge is going to be with us, the team moving forward, is what is that right balance, right? And that's what we'll work towards on programming to get that right.
So in the event we have a buskers festival, for example, or some major parade, we can crank it up and make it really festive, or we can have it muted down for other reasons why we want to have it quieter. And is that something that can be done on a daily basis, or is it a big deal to get that timing changed?
Setting the volume, I guess, if you want to use those words, is not difficult. We can change that at any time. We will enact sort of a set of preset programming, and that can be changed via Wi-Fi. It's not very difficult. It just takes a little bit of time. So anything is doable. We also want to celebrate certain key events, right? Maybe it's Breast Cancer Awareness Day, or Mother's Day, or Valentine's Day, or, whichever you choose. But yes, we can program it to anything.
You can ask your question now, Councillor Darrell.
Thank
then
you.
I'll have one, then we'll get on to
Through
comments.
you, Chair Henry. So much going on. Okay, so the one thing I did want to find out a little bit more about is it says in page 84 of our agenda, it is the project milestones and dates. And so it says the contractor to install stainless steel structures and other associated landscape elements on August 13th. And about 2 weeks later, it's to install the LED electronics. I'm just wondering, is there any way that why is it taking that long? I guess it's really, I guess.
It's a standard Councillor Darrell question.
Right, sorry.
Through Councillor Henry, I think a big part of it is just a procurement timelines. It's the time to get everything purchased and manufactured and get the contract out there. So it's going to take a little bit of time, and these are ambitious timelines still, but we're going to try to meet them as best we can.
Amazing. So if I could just say it would be really wonderful, and if there's any way possible to have it done by August. September tends to be, well, as you all know, a crazy time in Uptown Waterloo. We get 45,000 new people to come back to our city, so it's a good time to have things done at that point instead of stuff happening. And then the other question, because of course I just can't help myself. So right now it's King Street. Is there a possibility that we could look at doing these on Regina Street and Herb and Bridgeport? What are the chances of us doing this on more streets? Have we thought about that? Can we budget that? Mr. Anderson? Bueller? Ferris? Bueller?
Through you, Chair Henry, look to Mr. Rapp on this one, but I don't believe at this time we have capital funding budgeted. I think it is a vision to consider the south area, south on King Street, with respect to Regina or Willis Way. Maybe Mr. Rapp can add to that.
Certainly to Councillor Drill, in addition to what Tim said, he's accurate. There is no current funding for an expanded program, but I think as we move forward, particularly with the 2020 budget, which is the budget where we'll be introducing more significant changes versus the 2019 budget, that depending on the community and council of the day, there could be room to add to it, but as Tim said, the thought is to introduce it north of Herb, south of the Ion, with all the improvements that part of the core has seen, to do something different for those north of Herb. But the limitation is really only a budget for the most part as to where this can go in a council decision at one point.
Have we gone through the list? Yeah. Okay. I just had a couple of questions as well, building on where Mr. Rapp was. Given the installation that's being described in this project is from, really the spur line up to Bridgeport, because that's the part of the King Street project that our region's wonderful contractor was able to only complete to last year. Is this allocation all the way up to Central Street, or does it end at Bridgeport?
To you, Chair Henry, the funding is for right to Central Street, so we're only going to install this year up to Bridgeport, but the funding is there for the rest.
I think that's very helpful, and I see as well that there are some strong details we'll be able to get on operating costs and some existing operating lines that we'll be able to manage in the 2020 to 2022 budget. So I appreciate that we'll have better data at that time. I'll look for Councillor Durrell to move it. And I'll look for Councillor Whaley to second that. And any comments, Councillor Whaley, before I go to Councillor Maven's comments?
Yeah, I think it's great that we start off and get a taste for it. The community gets a taste for it before we go to all the other streets that Councillor Durrell will. Let's get a sense of how it's received. I know that in Paris they have it on the Champs-Élysées, and it's a wonderful, wonderful feature if you ever have a chance to see it there. And perhaps one day we can be the Paris of Canada. But this is a great start, just a wonderful start.
Are you saying, Councillor Whaley, that less is more?
I think we want to, give the community a chance to see how wonderful it is, and they'll be right with you. Let's give them a chance to see it, and they'll be right with you when we have some money in 2020.
Not sure about how much money we'll have in 2020. Councillor Maven?
And thank you, through you, Chair Henry. As Councillor Durrell had spoken before, we had chatted before council, and one of my concerns about this was vandalism and how susceptible these units would be to being vandalized. She's assured me that her children couldn't destroy them, so that it's as much as possible. So vandalism is not considered to be an issue?
I'll let Adam answer that. We gave the designer a lot of design criteria to work from, so I'll let him explain what he's done.
The structure itself is sturdy. We're doing structural analysis to verify that it's safe and within parameters that will satisfy everybody. The polycarbonate, which is the lens that houses the LED lightings themselves, is literally indestructible. You can't break it with a baseball bat or an axe if you swung at it. The only thing it doesn't handle well is if somebody held a blowtorch to it. I can't design around that. Having said that, we also have removed any opportunity for vertical rings, because in essence, all we'd be creating a ladder, right? Okay. So that's why it also keeps the simplicity of the design, and we only have the one ring at the top that just has for structural integrity. So as far as vandalism, it's stainless steel, it won't rust, you can't climb it unless you really want to, and it won't break.
Okay. So the only thing we can look forward to is the shoes, the running shoes over top of it, that sort of thing. The second issue is, when I worked for the region, there was an interesting time when a Sunnyside home for the aged, one of the staff members developed a magnetic lock for residents, and especially in some of the areas, and the region decided to get a patent on it, and they did, and it went very well. I don't know whether this is potentially a patentable item or not.
That idea's been thrown around a bit, and we're not sure what to do yet, to be honest.
I think the advantage is we have many people in the community we're regularly in contact with who know about such things. Hopefully, Tim, that's something you can follow up on.
By the way, my thanks to the BIA for $400,000. That is incredible. Well done.
Okay, so that's all been moved and seconded and discussed quite a bit. All those in favor of this exciting lighting initiative? That would be all of us. Thank you very much. Next item we have is even more exciting. It is the 2017 annual statement of increased density account and cash in lieu of parkland account per legislative requirements. This report is before us. I understand Michael is available to answer any detailed questions you have about parkland dedication, section 37, and various tables thereof. Seeing none, can I get a mover? Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Burke. Any discussion on this? Seeing none. Seeing all those in favor? Carried. And Michael will not go very far because he's prepared for you a 2017 annual statement of development charges, again, as per legal legislative requirements. In addition to new legal legislative requirements that we add words saying we're not doing any of the bad things we're not allowed to do. I understand that's a new declaration that we're going to make with Michael's support. Any questions on this item, Council? Council Maven?
Through you, Chair Henry. The only question I've got is there was a briefing note sent to Council just I think yesterday on development charges and the projects in the capital budget for 2018. And I'm wondering why that couldn't have been perhaps an information report. It was well written, very easy to understand. It couldn't have been an information report to Council, perhaps along with this annual statement. I realize the annual statement's a regulatory requirement, but that piece of information could have, in my mind, it's not confidential, just information.
I'm also looking to your left, Michael, if there's anyone that would prefer to take it other than yourself, but you can go ahead.
Through your Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, you're right, the report in front of you right now, it's an annual report, nothing to do with budget, it's kind of past looking at the activity from 2017, so we didn't feel it was an appropriate avenue to include it in this report. That being said, staff is currently working through the 2019 budget, so we're working through the actual parameters about staging and cash flow for these budget items. So what we just wanted to let Council know is that for 2018 there's really no immediate impacts, but we don't know the finer details of what that future budget will look like at this point in time, so we didn't feel we could bring a report in tandem with this one. So I can throw over if Philippe wants to add any comments as well. Throw over to
so perhaps a report in the near future then?
I'm looking at Ms. Patel.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, so I agree with what Michael is saying. It's unrelated to this report, so we took the option of putting in a briefing note to just keep this report simple and not complicated with other aspects of it. When we do the 2019 budget, in our capital budget, you have the outlook for each and every reserve fund in the capital budget book, so at that stage you will be able to see that we've got the reserve fairly in balance. It won't have any material deficits. So this was a timing and a cash flow issue that in the DC study some projects got front-ended, but in the 19 budget we will be spreading them out and it will automatically show in the regular capital budget material that we put forward.
Okay, and I'm seeing in the briefing note that we can't distribute those to anybody. They're not public information as far as I know, but there's only one project going ahead. It happens to be the project that I want to go ahead, but that's just coincidence, I think. There's a number of projects that aren't proceeding this year because of the issues you raised, Keshwar. So if that came to Council as a report at some point in time, I think it would probably be useful to everybody in the public, I'm thinking.
Through you, Chair Henry, I'm assuming you're referring to the WMRC facility addition and space conversion that is moving ahead, which is on the agenda today. In terms of seeking approval for, let me just look at it again, but I believe it's on.
No, I'm actually thinking of the Iron Needles or Crossroad. Either which way, it's not the same one that's on the agenda today. Take a look at it if you would, please, and if it can come forward, information can come forward as a report, it would be appreciated. So
we'll take a look. Thank you, Councillor.
See staff taking that under advisement. Next up, have we moved that? No, we need to receive it as information. Do I have a mover and seconder, or did I not get that far? No. So Mayor Jaworski would like to move that, seconded by Councillor Burke for the annual statement. Any further questions on the report before us? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have the Waterloo Public Library mechanical upgrades funding request. I see our library CEO anxiously waiting to figure out if she's going to have air conditioning this summer. As the weather heats up. There's no presentation here. Is there any question? Council moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Whaley. And I just thought I'd note, because I shared some email traffic with Kevin in advance, since this did go through an application that we didn't get for grant funding, that in addition to the benefits identified in the report, utility cost savings of 25% year over year and greenhouse gas reduction of 20% over baseline was what Kevin told me back. So these are good things that will come from this project. Councillor Whaley.
It was noted in the report that the library is going to have to be closed down for a period of time while this work is done. Have we figured out just what period of time that would be and when?
Through you, Chair Henry. Right now we're anticipating that this project construction would commence in September and would likely take the bulk of the fall in order to complete a project of this size. The duration which the library will need to remain closed is uncertain at this point until we've proceeded with the remainder of the design, but it won't be weeks. It will likely be closer to a month if I had to guess, but that's something that we will work through with the consultant in the next phases of design here.
You may not be able to answer this question, but what is the intention for the staff resourcing during that time?
I probably can't speak to the specifics of that. That's probably a question better directed to Lori, but I know in general, we've been in discussions with them as to some contingency options. We've brainstormed with them if there was opportunities to use other city facilities, maybe on a pop-up basis or something like that for the period that this one would be affected. Obviously, there's limitations to what you can do in terms of library collections, but certainly around programming, there may be opportunities to sort of collaborate between the two organizations to share space for that.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you. So there's going to be construction on Albert Street as well. Is that this summer, or is that during the same time? I believe, correct, that so whether there will be, crazy time for visiting the library during construction, and then the library will have to close down for the construction on the library. It doesn't line up, does it?
Yes, through you, Chair Henry, that is correct. That is my understanding that there's a fairly significant road reconstruction project happening on Albert Street. My understanding is that project will be substantially complete by the end of August, with our project starting in September. So it's beneficial in the sense that there won't be a conflict in the construction schedules there. We'll be able to get cranes into the site as needed to hoist this new equipment into the building. In terms of the timing of our project beginning in September, it's typically an advantageous time for mechanical projects. A lot of mechanical contractors are very busy during the school shutdown period over the summer, so they're generally looking for work and they're hungry and they're competitive come September, so that's something that's advantageous with the schedule we're proposing here as well.
Anything further, Council? Did I get that one moved and seconded? I can't remember now. Yes? Okay. All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have Waterloo Memorial Recreation Center expansion release of funds. So we had no presentation here I'm aware of, so just questions of staff. If there are any, see it moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Any comments, Council? Seeing none, I appreciate the continued work that's happening on this expansion, and see that we've had to juggle a few things to make sure we can pool the money for one project based on the timing, and I'll look forward to seeing what we can do in terms of the funding balance in next year, since I see that's coming back. But glad to see this project continuing to move ahead. Take the vote on that. All those in favor? That's carried. Then we have a very exciting allocation of 2017 surplus. Paul brings us good news this year, which is relative to some other years when the news was generally less good. Any questions for Paul? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor V, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Any comments, Council? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. And then we have a brownfield tax increment grant for 181 King Street South, prepared by Mr. Mounsey, and Mr. Mounsey will now present to us about this this report.
Members of Council and FS&P Committee, just a few quick highlights for the application. Just wanted to bring your attention that the City of Waterloo has a Brownfields Community Improvement Plan. Our plan is organized into two parts. There is a regional development charge program that's administered by the Region of Waterloo that provides financial incentives through regional development charges. The city does not contribute towards any funding related to that incentive structure. The second part of the Brownfields program, which is the city's component, relates to tax increment grants. This is above and beyond the regional development charge incentive program by the Region of Waterloo. The city's program was introduced in 2013. And so the city at the time identified for the potential incentive, or it identified financial incentives for redevelopment of eligible brownfield sites. This program kicks in when the development costs for eligible remediation costs exceed the regional development charge fees. The city tax increment grant program is in effect with the regional TIG program, so they're jointly related in terms of regional DCs and city DCs. Excuse me, tax rates. Popular programs in the region. So the TIG program is applied in both Cambridge and in Kitchener with no termination dates. That's the same for the Region of Waterloo. And so the City of Waterloo introduced this program in 2013 with a sunset clause of 5 years. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. The Regional Development Charge program was used for 14 Princess Street. That was the first time that this program was used as it relates to brownfield incentive, following when the regional development charges exemptions were lifted in 2010. We do have today, and that's the purpose of the report, is the first TIG application for 185 King Street South. This is known, 181 King Street South. This is known as the Circa 1877 project. And the developer came in with knowing that this was a brownfield site. They prepared a remedial action plan and identified the potential cost. An application was submitted to the city and to the region to look at the TIG potential. And the developer is proposing, which was approved, was a 19-story mixed-use building. In terms of remediation costs, which were identified and flagged, there is a $1.655 million remediation cost that was identified. So that fee is the cost to clean up the site with some contingency above and beyond the regional, that is the total cost of the brownfield remediation costs. That number, 1.655 million, is broken down to $1.361 million in regional development charge incentives. The vast majority of this brownfield cost is going to be paid for by the regional development charges. The remaining surplus was identified at almost $300,000 in terms of eligible TIG costs, and that is split between the region and the City of Waterloo. This example shows that it does take time for brownfields to mature and to move through the review and incentive process. The program is gaining traction, and we're of at least 1 or 2 other applications that would have potential to use this over the next 12 to 18 months. In terms of location, we're familiar as it relates to the zone change application at 181 King Street South. It's a 0.73 acre property. The key points is that there's an existing 3-story building on it today. That building had a furniture factory, 1890 to 1937. So there was industrial uses operating in that manufacturing plant. Following that, in 1937 to 84, it was a plywood and veneer wholesaler, so there was additional activities on that site of industrial nature. And then one of Ontario's first microbreweries, Brick Brewery, moved in 1984 to 2014 and added some additional facilities on the site. The property is listed as a municipal heritage register, so there's some significance there that was evaluated through the zone change application. Moving forward, there was a series of boreholes and testings that happened on the site. There was over 27 boreholes that were taken on the site. A good number of monitoring wells were established, and through a phase 2 environmental assessment, what they looked at was that there were levels of contamination above the ministry criteria. There's a more thorough review in terms of the potential impacts that we have, but it relates to, for example, soil samples relating to petroleum hydrocarbons, metals, and what they call PAHs, parameters, related to the regulatory table standards. In terms of groundwater samples, they did look at several metals and VOC parameters that exceeded the ministry levels. So it just shows that the site was a brownfield and it met the eligibility criteria. Through this process, ultimately, the applicant prepared a detailed study, and that's where they identified the $1.655 million in remediation costs. In terms of the financial impacts, and this gets to the whole purpose of the TIG program, the assessment comparison in 2017, it was identified to have a municipal tax, municipal property assessment of $931,000. That's for the property and the existing building. In terms of the future property assessment after redevelopment, using MPAC criteria, this project is estimated to be valued at $63.786 million. So in terms of today versus future, in terms of land value, there's a substantive increase in that value. In terms of the tax breakdown and comparisons, this is what we need to look at in terms of TIG financing. There is a regional city tax split. The region has a 64.3% tax split versus the City of Waterloo 35.7% ratio. That's the difference in terms of the funding level or the revenue levels. In 2017, there was approximately $23,933 in taxes generated on the property. The city portion was about $5,000, slightly less at $4,947. In terms of future tax assessment, and this was run through a calculator and reviewed with other staff and went through a very comprehensive process, this property would likely generate $784,000 in property taxes. The city component on an annual basis would be $232,464. So this is the delta, the gap difference between existing taxes versus future taxes through redevelopment. In terms of payment schedule, the way that the TIG program is set up, the dollar value is quite modest in terms of this first TIG application. The level of contamination on the site generated about $1.655 million of contamination remedial costs. In terms of remaining balance, there's about just less than $300,000 in TIG eligibility. So when you take the city and region tax splits, this would be paid out in the first year in terms of a tax increment grant payment schedule. Rather than going 7 years or potentially 10 years, it's a 1-year payout because of the dollar values. The city portion is identified at $105,164. That's the city portion. And then the regional portion, that's the 67% ratio, is about $189,000 with some change. So that totals almost $300,000. So that is the ratio, that is the payment plan, and if approved moving forward, the city would have to enter into some agreements for that tax structure incentive. just to finalize on the last two slides here, because this is Waterloo's first TIG application, is that this project is an eligible brownfield subject to the brownfield criteria. This project will result in significant assessment growth in tax revenues. That was the analysis that was undertaken in the report. The project is subject to the Regional Development Charge brownfield program, which covers a good portion of the remedial costs. So that's taken the lion's shares of the remediation. City Council approval is required for remaining TIG financing. So if this, what I mean by that is if City Council chooses to support this TIG financing, the region's TIG financing will also come into play to cover the 67% remaining balance, but the city portion is required in terms of the funding model. If approved, the TIG agreement will be required at a later time to the satisfaction of the city and regional solicitors. So a complex agreement will be required. The landowner, in combination with the Region Waterloo and City Waterloo, have to enter into a comprehensive agreement that will be taken to council. That happens at a later time. The TIG applies to the first year tax assessment only. As I mentioned, the payment schedule, this is a one-time fee within the first year. In terms of the city brownfield program, and I mentioned the 5-year sunset clause, it expires in September of 2018 this year. So our Brownfields TIG program is only in effect for 5 years and expires this September. As we were moving through our first TIG and with the potential of future TIGs, what we're asking for as part of this report is that staff recommend to extend a 1-year extension to September 2019 as a bridge gap, just to maintain the city TIG is still part of the Brownfield Incentives Program. That would keep the regional TIG process in play, and the other cities have that component as well in terms of core area TIG or brownfield incentives across the cities of Kitchener and Cambridge. We're asking that we'd also report back to council pending any future regional decisions or changes, so there's a communication process if there's changes next year, and we can incorporate that with council. And if approved, an amendment to the city's Community Improvement Plan Bylaw 2013-123 will be required, an amendment to enable it, subject to city and regional councillors. I talked quite a bit, and I'm sorry it was a little choppy, but I think in terms of the key recommendations, we're asking for the CIO report to be approved, as outlined in the recommendations, that the tax increment grant be approved to the numbered company, which is in essence HIP Developments for the property at 181 King Street, that the joint tax increment does not exceed a total amount of $105,164, so we're placing a maximum cap, so it does not exceed that. So they submitted the studies, they identified the costs, and we're setting a maximum cap so it doesn't continue to go forward. Not all cities do that. In terms of the Region Waterloo Brownfield Coordinator being advised, we need to provide that recommendation to the region, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute a TIG agreement and any related documents in coordination with the Region Waterloo and City Waterloo solicitors, and so there's that comprehensive agreement process that will come to you later. And then the last recommendation that we added in related to the sunset costs, a bridging recommendation just to extend the program to 2019 of September, and we did review this with the region, and they're supportive of continuing that forward, and happy to discuss future brownfield incentives next year. So that is the application, and this is again Waterloo's first TIG brownfield.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Questions? Councillor Whaley.
Well, I think it's a great report, but I can tell you that one of my constituents called me on this and said, here's a company that's paid $1.9 million for the land, and they end up with a $63 million windfall. And why are we giving $105,000 to this for this purpose? That's not my take. That's the constituent's take. So just for the record, of the $1.6 million cleanup costs, a great majority of that cost is picked up by the developer themselves, right? And that they're merely just taking advantage of a tax grant that we created.
Through you, Chair Henry. That's how the CIP program was established. The program was specifically established to facilitate the redevelopment of dirty properties. Someone had to invest in expensive land in the uptown, and that property came in at in and around $5 million an acre on an acre basis. And someone had to invest to redevelop that with constraints. So it follows it follows the standards and processes of all the regional TIG programs. And you're right, Councillor Whaley, the developer does see an automatic return at the regional development charge side of things. And then the other remaining balance is the cost to pay for this remediation versus the property sitting. So yes, there is an economic incentive built in.
And from our perspective, the use of the property before was an underutilized industrial site that was gaining very little taxes. And suddenly, the tax windfall from the city is so great that this TIG is paid off in the first year, and for the next 50 years, that building will continue to be a great source of taxes for the city, correct?
Through you, Chair Henry, you summed it up very nicely, Councillor Whaley. That is the purpose of the program. And in terms of generating, facilitating reinvestment in properties along a light rail transit and in an urban growth center, it's achieving a very good density that is supported by the city's official plan. And in terms of facilitating the right type of density to facilitate and make use of the TIG program with minimal cost to the city on this application, these are just foregone revenues. It's essentially delaying it by a year for a portion of it, the total potential tax revenue. So the process has worked for this application.
Thank you very much. Other questions from Council? Councilor Maven?
Through you, Chair Henry, and thank you very much, Ryan. And I support the TIG program. I came back in 2013 and said the timing wasn't right, and I still believe that, and think it's proven to be true. You said there's 4 more applications coming?
Through you, Chair Henry, we're aware of some potential brownfields that are going through the zoning change process right now. And one of those will be coming to council later this year. So it takes about a year to go through the process. And so not 4, but 1 or 2 applications that might hit the next 12 months to 18 months is what I indicated.
Okay, I see it as a win-win. I mean, the developer gets his remediation costs paid for, and this 1 year payback is incredible. So that's excellent. Disappointed with the program because, again, I was assured that there was lots that were going to come forward at the time, and they didn't happen. Any idea what happened to all those projects? Because there were an awful lot of projects. Did they just not think it's worthwhile, or what? Because TIG there's a lot of red tape to a TIG, let's face it.
Through you, Chair Henry, it's a very onerous process because in order to satisfy it, you have to complete the full environmental reports and then the full auditing and then the full cost receipts, but you'd expect that in terms of justifying the costs. There are brownfield sites distributed across the city of Waterloo. It just shows that these sites are highly complex. They take a lot longer than one thinks. And in terms of the city receiving its first application, it took almost 3 years, if not 4 years, to process the first one in terms of original intent. So when you look at other sites in the uptown in terms of longer term implications, I think the original reporting and consultation remains in effect and is valid, but it just takes longer than one thinks. And that's the value of the applications. When you look at our other cities in the region, they have a greater volume of brownfield TIG programs and use of those programs, but those programs have been in place for a lot longer. So again, it's all relative, and I think we're just starting to see an uptick in the new trend and folks using that incentive.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I think the easy land first and the hard land comes a little bit later, I think. Okay, have we got this on the floor yet? No, I'll look for a mover. Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Whaley. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. And next up, thank you, Ryan. And next up we have the and thanks, Ryan, by the way, for showing me earlier that the region's confirmation was in writing, that they'll continue participating. I looked for that before we got to this afternoon. Next up, we have a report by Mr. Nevin, Waterloo Region Supervised Consumption Services City comments. Do you have any brief opening remarks, Mr. Nevin first, or just here for questions?
Really just here for questions, Chair Henry.
Okay, I'll look to council. Councilor Burke.
As I look at the way this is written, I just want to make sure that we're saying the right thing, and that the decision on these kinds of sites is based on where they can be most effective, where they can actually save a life. Because I think, as has been pointed out, it is unlikely the province is going to fund 3 safe consumption sites in an area this size. And what we're really saying here as a city is, no matter where they go, we need to ensure that these sites go where they can make a difference. Is that the message?
Through you, Chair Henry, absolutely, Councillor Burke. From my perspective, that's the message. Limited resources, choose wisely where the region locates one or more of these facilities.
I'm seeing an appetite from the mayor to move the motion and then make a comment. So the mayor will move it, seconded by Councillor Beath. Your worship.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Scott, for your work on this. Through the region, I've been involved in this for quite some time, and have taken the opportunity to visit some local sites and delve into the Waterloo context on this. And I think what Mr. Nevin has put up here is a heat map, and you'll see that it shows red spots and, you know, reddish spots, certainly in the city of Waterloo. But what we don't know is we don't know the details of all these spots for privacy reasons and aggregation reasons. So I think it's incumbent upon us to use a lens of public health, safety, and saving lives, as Councillor Burke mentioned. That's what we're doing here in our community, and we don't know the data. Public health will have access to that data, and we'll let the process continue on, unfettered by anything political, because the goal is to save lives here. And so we'll see what the recommendations come from the Regional Waterloo Public Health people who are doing the analysis, and we look forward to that. But this is certainly not about saying anything about whether Waterloo should have one or not. The statistics and data will show whether, and more often with the opioid calls increasing, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, I think, in all communities across North America.
Other comments from council? I think I'd say the mayor said it pretty well. So with no further discussion, all those in favor? That's all of us. Very much. Consideration notice of motion given a previous meeting. We have one. Notice of motion, I see none. Communications and correspondence and regional information correspondence, we have none. There is no unfinished business. Is there any new business, council? Seeing none, I have a question for staff before I turn it over to the mayor for the special counsel. Today was a very important day. It's the first day that the contractors are back to complete the streetscaping work on King Street, and we can see that in terms of more responsible fencing and some barriers for some of that. I was just looking to staff, I think Mr. Dykstra, to comment on the enforcement strategy that staff anticipate using as this construction project rolls out in terms of separated cycling lanes that have been less separated and less cycling, but as the project completes, I'm hoping to hear that we're transitioning into an active enforcement phase.
Yes, through you, Councillor, to the rest of Council, yes, that is the case. As sections are completed, municipal enforcement will take active steps to enforce the bike lanes and the parking restrictions that go along with that.
I think the active question, Commissioner Dykstra, that I know we were talking about was how the contractor proposes to complete section by section, and whether or not we've heard back from the region for whether when they move from one section to the next it will actually be completed, or whether they're going to have to come back and sign and paint later.
I'm going to refer that to Commissioner Rapp.
Mr. Rapp.
Thank you, Chair Henry. My understanding in the most recent discussion with the Region of Waterloo is that they will be working on the west side of King Street first and moving southwards block by block, but I've not yet heard confirmation that their request to the contractor is that they would finish everything block to block, including such things as signage and painting, but that has been a request made by the region to the contractor, and I'm hopeful that that would be implemented by the contractor.
I'm happy to add my voice, as much as it matters a lot less to the region's voice with their own contractor on this, but I'm happy to add my voice to that as well. I think we've had a lot of patience from folks that have watched those lanes be used for other than their intended purpose, and now that construction is finishing, I know they expect to see active enforcement, and I know I expect to see it, and so I certainly look to the region's contractor to allow us to do that in an effective and efficient manner. And I'll save my other 4-letter words about the last 5 months to myself at this point. Okay, so seeing that, are there any other questions, Council? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Burke. All those in favor? And now I turn it over to the Mayor for special counsel.
And we'll have 2 items here. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Special Council meeting Monday, May 14th, 2018. Have disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. With that, I have a notice of motion, so I would turn the chair over to Councillor Henry, since it's very convenient for him.
I assume the mayor would like to move his notice of motion. Do we have to waive it, or do we just roll through it? Waive it. So motion to waive notice of motion. Councillor Whaley, seconded by Councillor Veith. All those in favor of allowing us to consider this? Carried. Mayor, I assume you'll move your motion and then speak to it. Seconded by Councillor Veith. Mayor, go ahead.
Well, in light of all the changes that are happening potentially, or not changes, but all the action happening politically at the provincial level, that locally we thought it wise to continue to advocate for all-day two-way GO train service because of the issues on the 401 and how it impacts City of Waterloo people, as well as continuing to advocate for high-speed rail, which is something that will unleash the power of 6 million people once that's installed. And really the recommendation is to call upon all political parties at provincial and federal levels to remain committed to two-way all-day GO train service and high-speed rail, and further that the Council of the City of Waterloo directs that a copy of this resolution be sent to the Prime Minister of Canada and a lot of other people.
Anyone else wish to comment? Seeing none, moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. And you said there was something else, or do you want to take the chair back?
Yeah, I will take the chair back. Thank you. So occasionally we win awards, and more frequently than not, we've been winning lots of awards. But every now and then, some of our team members win an award, like Mr. Anderson. And I received this letter informing us of the following. The Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators, CAMA, their Long Service Recognition Awards program recognizes and celebrates the dedication to public service and the municipal management of our members, which is a significant priority for our association. These awards are based on the number of years of full-time paid employment in municipal government in a management capacity, such as CAO, and they are granted at 10 years and 5-year increments. This year in your municipality, we acknowledge the commitment of your Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Tim Anderson, for his 15 years of municipal service in a management capacity. It goes on to ask me to make a special presentation to him at City Council. Unfortunately, it also mentions that his recognition pin has been mailed to him. So unfortunately, unless I took away his pin, I don't have anything to present to him. But on behalf of all of us, Tim, thank you for your continued enlightened service. Thank you. Councillor Henry, Councillor Burke, who's moved his hand. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thanks.